Alston, former Liberal Cabinet Minister, joins us as well. Richard, Bruce, good morning to you both.
Morning.
All right, Richard, you can hear... Oh, good. Let's start with the hunger strike, the refugees. Bruce, we have a pile of refugees now, apparently around 82, who are saying that they are going on hunger strike because they weren't told that they would be sent to Naru. They wouldn't have come if they had thought that was the case. This is a real test for the government, isn't it?
It is, and I think given the stand that the government's taken, reopening Naru, I don't think they're going to blink. I think they're just going to hold their nerve on this one. If they do concede anything, then I think it just sends the wrong message.
Yeah.
It's exactly what they don't want to do.
Well, it's the mirror of the right message, isn't it? I mean, if they concede to this, I'm going back on everything they said about this new policy, but sadly it plays right into the hands of those, even in the Labor Party, who are fundamentally opposed to offshore processing.
Indeed, and this is always going to be a problem for Julia Gillard and the government, because there's a significant constituency out there on the left who are very concerned about offshore processing, and they're just going to have to manage that. However, as we know from the Nielsen poll today, the change of policy is going down well with the public.
Absolutely. We'll talk about the polls in a moment. Richard, it looks to me like the government, and as Bruce says, the government is not going to buckle under the pressure on Christmas Island.
Well, it'll be a big turnaround if that's the case, because they've had a pretty impressive track record of buckling whenever there's been a level of concern from the left. So let's hope that's right. But there's a lot more work to be done. I mean, after all, they've gone part way in supporting Liberal policy. They haven't gone for temporary protection visas or turning the boats back when it's safe to do so.
No, but if you look at the polls, maybe they don't need to do that.
We will see.
Yeah. So
well,
what do you... So,
yes,
Richard,
we
what do you...
get onto that later.
Yeah, we will. What do you do, though, Richard? Do you just let them starve to death?
No, look, I'm not even sure that this is a full-scale hunger strike. The Department of Immigration says there are a couple of people who have missed meals so far and they won't confirm it's a hunger strike. So we will see. But, look, obviously smugglers coach people to play all sorts of tricks and games, and understandably they're going to do whatever they can to avoid going to Naru because they know what will happen. And no doubt the smugglers are telling them, look, if you're in Nauru, you'll only be there for 5 minutes anyway. So there's a long way to go on all this. We'll see if this is a real deterrent.
Yep.
And if it's not, then of course they need to go further.
And the one thing it teaches us, Bruce, is that absolutely it is offshore processing is a deterrent. I mean, that's why they're allegedly going on hunger strike. I'll put the same question to you. Do you just let them starve to death?
No, I don't think you do. I think they'd have to go a long way before they took that course, but there are other means available to them. Apparently, some of the people are already saying they want to go back to Indonesia rather than go to Nauru or Manus. So I think it's doing what the government wants to do, and that is send a very strong message that you take the very big risk by coming this way.
You have been in Darwin. How long were you there in the end?
Oh, 3 weeks.
Was it a waste of time, as it turns out?
Well, it was a tough campaign. They've all been pretty difficult.
I don't mean to be cruel.
Oh, please go ahead. Everyone else is. No, look, I think it was a really hard campaign. We fought it around Darwin, which is traditionally where the government has made and broken.
And let's face it, you won in Darwin.
And we got swings in key seats in Darwin to us, but in the bush there was a real unhappiness. It's very hard to work out exactly what is happening in the bush in the Northern Territory because they're remote communities. You can't just pick up the phone and do phone polling. But I guess with the benefit of hindsight, there were some strong indications that there was some unhappiness out there about a number of issues.
Everyone looks for federal implications from state elections, and I would have thought the federal implication from this was from the bush. You look at what happened in Queensland, where those votes that Labor could always count on swung towards Qatar, and then you look at what happened in the Northern Territory, where the Liberals took advantage of those. I mean, am I right? Is that the key federal implication?
Well, there are a number of things happened there. One was an amalgamation of shire councils, which was very unpopular with Aboriginal communities. You're basically talking about remote Aboriginal communities here, and that was a decision of the Northern Territory government. Some people are talking about the intervention as having an adverse impact, and certainly there are sections of the Northern Territory in those remote communities who are very unhappy about both the Howard Brough intervention and the subsequent one by the Gillard government. But at least one of the candidates who looks like winning was a very strong pro-intervention candidate down in the seat of Stewart. So it's very confused, Paul. But what it does tell us is that, you know, Aborigines in the Northern Territory in particular have a voice now, and they're going to make it be heard. And whoever's in government, people are going to have to be very responsive.
And this, if nothing else, this Northern Territory election has proven to the bush people that actually their vote does make a big difference.
Indeed.
Richard, this changes the landscape for the Liberals, for the coalition, doesn't it? To know that here is a pool of votes, a considerable sized pool of votes in the country that is open to them now.
Yes, look, Bruce was on the ground and I wasn't, so I'm a bit wary about pontificating, but it does seem to me, if you try and analyse why there was almost a 15% swing against Labor in the bush, it's got something to do with them being a bit tired of the paternalism. I mean, Labor's general approach is to try and buy votes by handing out goodies, which you can do in Darwin. Public servants love it. But you try that in the bush. The CLP were advocating mandatory rehabilitation for drunks. Now, that is not a soft policy.
No, you wouldn't think.
And I think what you're really finding is that people realise the sort of Pearson solution is the way to go, that you've got to have quid pro quos, you've got to have carrots as well as sticks, or both.
And it does show you too, you mustn't underestimate that vote. There's a lot of wisdom in the bush. Just very quickly, Richard, the polls, if you follow the polls, what you look for is a trend, and after 3 months now, you've got to say the trend is towards Labor.
Well, I think there's a rebalancing, if you like. I don't think there have been too many federal elections where the end result has been anything like an 8% margin, and that's pretty much still what you've got in the Nielsen poll. So you always expect, as you get closer to an election, that things tighten up. Having said that, of course, you'd like the gap to be as wide as possible in your favour, but I wouldn't read too much into it at this stage.
All right, so Bruce, are you reading a lot into it? Is it just a rebalancing?
I think there's been some policy shifts in the last little while that have helped, particularly the refugee one. Carbon hasn't bitten as hard as people thought it might.
The two big policies, the refugee one's off the table now, and the carbon tax really, as you say, hasn't bitten.
It hasn't bitten too much. So now it'll come down to, you know, a fight between the two leaders. If I were Tony Abbott, I'd still be feeling pretty good at 54, 46. However, I think there would be people in the Liberal Party who'd be starting to get a little bit anxious if this preferred Prime Minister number keeps going Gillard's way.
See, that's the interesting thing. How big a problem is that for the Liberals? I mean, we've got Gillard is on 46, Abbott on 45.
Well, I think Abbott has got to switch into positive mode very soon.
So does he have to become more of a presidential candidate rather than an attack dog?
Indeed, and I think he struggles to do that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Bruce, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Bruce Hawker and Richard Alston, thank you very much.